en su canal de frecuencia modulada estereofónica multiplex, La Voz Radio, desde New Haven, Connecticut, al mundo.
Muy buenas tardes. Queremos dejarles saber que ustedes nos están escuchando a través de WNHH 103.5 FM, también La Voz Radio, y estamos desde Downtown New Haven. Estamos streaming live en Facebook, YouTube y Twitter. Y este es el show que pasa, y con tu anfitriona Norma Rodríguez-Reyes. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a alguien que le quiero presentar, porque desde ahora en adelante él va a ser mi co-host. ¿Cómo se dice co-host? Oh, wait a minute. We got to do this in Spanish and English first.
Oh.
Ay, Dios mío, I'm over here and eso. Sorry, perdonen, pero tenemos que ir en inglés primero, ¿ok? So vamos a empezar nuevamente en inglés. Bueno, hello, you're listening to us via WNHH 103.5 FM. Your host, Norma Rodríguez-Reyes, en el show K-PASA. You also can listen to us via La Voz Hispana Radio and Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So here we have with us today an individual that from now on will be co-hosting this show K-PASA. Thank you, Jose, for agreeing to co-host. And his name is Jose Cadelario. And he was born and raised in New Haven, a product of all the positive people that make a difference in our community. Worked with Latino Youth Development, Columbus House, Community Action Agency, Jewish Family Services, and Citizens Television. In the private sector, Jose Candelario worked for News 8 and GABC Philly. Hosted many programs on public access, produced shows for television and stage, and is always a servant for our community. Thank you so much, Jose Candelario, for being here with us.
It is my pleasure to be here with Hispanic royalty, as Norma is normally introduced as when I see her in public. So I thank you very much. And the dedication that the newspaper, La Voz, has had to its community, you can't underestimate positive visuals of our community and how badly it is needed. And La Voz Hispana provides that. And so thank you.
Good. So as I was talking to Jose, I noticed that Jose has been in many of the organizations that were around and that are still around. Mm-hmm. But obviously, throughout the years, many influential people have.
It takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child, and in the New Haven community, I've had the opportunity of working with many, many people, many, many leaders over time. We had discussions, right? Working grassroots when I first started. I was registering voters, at an early age. At 13, 14, I'm knocking on doors thanks to Menino Osorio and Raul Avila, Dr. Avila now, from what I hear.
Yes, we're so proud of him.
So they took me under their wings, and then from then I got to work with the late John Martinez, and he introduced me to a whole different level of politics on a state and national level, because he was part of the Hispanic caucus, but on the national level. And he, going to New York and meeting with Efrain and other state reps from different parts of the country, he opened my eyes to see how a Latino can be fly and politic and pull it all off together at the same time and be a servant to his community. So those are my earliest influences. And then by high school, I had Ralph Ramos, who now runs Bergamo's Theater here in New Haven. And in high school and community, thanks to Gail Staggers, who brought him in for a little drumming, I got to meet Rafael Ramos, and he took me under his wings and provided me with a lot of, just positive influence, good message, always, he was always there for me as a mentor. To this day, I call Ralph and I ask him questions on things that I want to do, or if I have ideas and artistically. And he always provides me time. We always have time for lunch, and so people like that are tremendous, tremendous.
Jose, and I noticed that seamlessly you travel from one community to the other, and you get along well with the African American community, with the white community, and also with the Latino community, especially with the new immigrants that the new wave that has definitely been here for a while.
And that's been because of just how diverse New Haven is as a community. I spent my early years in Newhallville, so until I was about 10 or 12, I was in Newhallville, and probably the only Puerto Rican family living on Bassett Street, because all the Hispanics were always in Fairhaven. And I had the honor and opportunity to go to Lincoln Bassett and be one of the only Hispanic kids in the whole school for like 4 straight years. And that really introduced me to the African American community in a way that no one else. I mean, I didn't even know white people existed for a long time until one day, I guess I was like, old enough to understand. I was downtown and someone explained to me like, no, white people run the United States now. So I'm thinking like, well, African Americans run the city because that's all I see in my community, and it turned out to be different. But it was a good hodgepodge, because you should have seen the first time I went home to a Hispanic mom and said, I just had the best fried chicken in the world. Because she took it out on me with a spanking like 2 weeks later. But you never tell your mom, a Hispanic mom, that you found cooking better than hers. But I did find good cooking at my friend Roger's house, and he made that southern fried chicken for the first time. And I was like, wow. But and then we grow up in white America, right? And so, I suffer from identity crisis. Latinx, right now, we all suffer from identity crisis. We're in these communities, we're raised in America, we speak English, we barely speak any Spanish, and we're trying to find something to hang on to, or any little thing, because we're not represented in our media right now, as so to speak, and even less so back in the day. I mean, back in the day, who did we have as a Hispanic? Chico, we didn't have that kind of representation.
Yeah, Chico fruit market, right?
No. Chico's fruit market is one thing, but he had a business. But I'm talking about on TV.
Oh.
On TV, Chico and the Man, right? Wasn't that one of the programs?
Yes, it was in the 70s.
In the 70s, look at that. So our representation, it just wasn't there. So I was just blessed to grow up around people of color, of all people of color. And then and now as a mature adult, I started to travel around the world. So I've been to Peru, I've been to Costa Rica, and a Cocobado, and the ranger station, looking for animals. And I've been looking for pyramids in Guatemala, archaeological sites on the border between Guatemala and Mexico when they're running cocaine. And at the same time, there's like doctors out there, digging up pre-classic Mayan ruins, which is something that I really enjoyed. And I've been as far down south to Machu Picchu. And so I understand how in those communities, how the lighter color Hispanics in the inner city are well off compared to the more indigenous looking individuals in the countryside that are more poor and living off the land. So I seen that in all of the communities, and I understand why they come here looking for a better opportunity, because I see the conditions that they, and plus we're the greatest seller, advertisers of the American way. I mean, the American dream is very well shown on TV in other countries. So of course they want to come here. You don't understand that it's a commercial. Even for immigrants, they're drawn to this. They're drawn here by the imagery that America puts out. So compared to the imagery they got, which is of a goat in some situations, to living in America.
At the Connecticut, many people, especially since Connecticut is described as the land of steady habits, okay? And we don't like change. We don't like change. The people,
no, we're still Protestant.
Yeah.
We're Protestant New Haven.
The people that have never left Connecticut cannot relate to what you're describing right now, to the experiences and the diversity and all. As a matter of fact, many of the folks from Connecticut that have never been outside of the suburbs, okay, they don't. The only thing that they know about New Haven or Hartford or Bridgeport is all the negative things on TV. So they're even afraid to leave their suburban areas. So, and they don't care what happens. It wasn't until 9/11 that all of a sudden, things started changing a little bit, and you started realizing that, things can be very influential to what's going on out there and how it can affect the folks from New Haven and from Connecticut.
I mean, but that's partially the media's fault, and because we have a saying in media: if it bleeds, it leads. So the only way they're going to come into our community to cover us and put us on TV is there's a fire, some kind of gunshots or something to that effect. Then they're there. But for positivity in our community, for the people who are doing like drumming and the people who are working in the arts, anything positive. When it comes to people of color, it is hard to break over into that and provide that structure. People in the suburbs need to feel better about themselves. Well, how can you do that? Oh, by perpetuating negative stereotypes that are in their city. These Hispanics don't know how to treat each other. Because if you really look at it, the violent crimes or the crimes that happen in our community, they're not crimes that happen to each other. It's people that come into the community and create the crimes. So like right now in Fairhaven, right now they look at that Central Americans as an ATM machine. So you have kids coming from other neighborhoods going into Fairhaven and robbing these Central Americans or the immigrants because they don't have documentation. They rob them because they know they're not going to go to the police and report it. So you got to be careful about what kind of crime and who's bringing the crime and what causes the crime, because it all comes down to money. But at the same time, our communities are safe. I mean, we're raising children. We're raising leaders in them. I mean, I come from the Hill. And if you listen to what happened in the Hill during the 90s, I mean, during the 90s, the Hill was horrible. I mean, we had Kensington International. We had the Jungle Brothers. We had all kinds of gangs. We had all kinds of the Latin Kings. We had Solidos. We had, there was the ghetto and over here on Franklin Street. We had the Terror Dome up in Brookside. We had all these things. So I'm a product of that generation, and I turned out to be just fine. So you can't always listen to what you see in the mainstream media, because the truth is we have always had, especially Hispanics, we come from a community. We have a strong sense of community because all Antillians, especially people from the islands, we all come from colonization, and we come from dealing with lack of resources. It is built in our DNA to go somewhere and do what we can with what we can find.
What we have, definitely, or what we can find. So true.
So
true.
when you think of it that way, yeah, it takes a while for people to adjust to the American way. That's why, Fairhaven is like an intro to America. People come from before the first wave of immigrants were Puerto Ricans back in the 60s and 70s. There's always propaganda and a reason to bring us in. If the Filipinos came after World War II, so there's a migration from these islands, periodically. And now is the Central America, because they're always going to need a working class. Because let me tell you right now, any second generation American, or even it's hard to find a second generation Hispanic that wants to work at a McDonald's.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already privileged.
But what's very interesting? The same thing holds true with the Italian, Irish, and Polish. When they migrated here to the United States and to Connecticut, they worked very, very hard. And they made sure that their kids got educated so that they don't have to do what they're doing. So that's why a lot of the restaurants, a lot of the businesses, the mom and pop stores, the Italians and the Irish no longer own them anymore, because their kids didn't want to do that kind of work. So now it's our people who own these stores now.
Every second generation.
Yes.
Let me tell you right now, people always talking about these Mexicans work so hard. But that's only that first generation. That's the guy who just got here. Trust me, by the time his child grows up, they're going to be like, I don't work. They're going to be just as privileged as the next person and not work as hard and not value or respect the hard work it took to get here and establish yourself here. Because it takes a lot for you got to learn a language, you got to learn a culture, and then you got to learn two cultures, because now you realize like it's so diverse. So
but when you're talking about learning two cultures, that's one of the main issues we have. We have to know both cultures and know when to use which one, because your parents don't appreciate you being an American, okay? You can be an American when you're hanging out with the Americans. But other than that, you have to be a Latino, or, a Puerto Rican. And
Man, I stopped trying to prove that I'm Latino. I stopped trying to prove anything because people get confused because, I look like an African American, like it or not. People see me, they be like, oh, that's a black man right there. Then they hear my name. They're like, oh, no, wait a second. What happened to this accent? Then they're like, well, that's a big Mexican with no accent, So it's like, I was like, you know what? I just got to be me and be I dominate the language. I assimilate it very well. My mom made sure. My mom didn't want me speaking Spanish. Although I speak Spanish and French on top of English, my mom didn't want me to speak Spanish. I had to self-teach it because in my house, I had to speak English only. She was dead set on me becoming Americanizado.
Yes.
You know how they say
Americanized.
that. Americanized.
But to me, the Roots movement, I remember when the Roots, the movie Roots came out, okay? I was a student at UConn at the time.
Don't age yourself. Jeez, Norma. I keep thinking you're 35.
I was a student at UConn at that time. And, all this time I was bred to, make sure that I spoke English without an accent. And but in the church and in our family, no, we had to speak Spanish because they wanted to make sure that we also kept our Spanish. But many of us that are lighter skinned, we just wanted to blend in, and we wanted to, they say that all the time, and it's terrible because they mention how you have to whiten the race. And to this day, I thought that was kind of years ago, and you have already grown out of that. But no, still today, people say that. And what does that mean, whitening the race? It means that you have to marry somebody white. And in the suburbs, people who move into the suburbs, they don't want anyone to know that they're anything but an American. But when we get over it once you're in the inner city. You've been exposed to a lot of diversity, and you've accepted, and you've done the road. You've traveled the identity. I remember when I went to UConn, they couldn't even pronounce my last name, Rodriguez. And today, Rodriguez is a household name. Every other person's name, Rodriguez.
Alex Rodriguez, everyone.
So, Jose, tell me.
You know what? I'm happy they get pronounced your, because I go to shows now and no one can pronounce my last name. So I'm happy for you. At least
Cadelario. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the, you mentioned Johnny Martinez, who's our state representative. Unfortunately, he passed away at a very young age. And there's a school here named after Johnny Martinez. We had to fight very, very hard to finally get a school named, we do have Roberto Clemente, but for Johnny, that it was very, very difficult. And
or as other people say, Robert Clement School. Yeah.
Yep. So, Johnny Martinez, you mentioned, but let's talk about some of these agencies and who were some of the influential people in your lives. So let's talk about Latino Youth Development, which unfortunately is no longer around, and we need a Latino Youth Development.
So Latino Youth Development, for those who don't know, was a youth organization in the hillside here in New Haven, and they were established in the 60s and 70s, and they had a nice building, but unfortunately, through those budget cuts through George Bush, we lost a lot of that money. So that funding, 1 year, especially the United Way, everyone in 1 year changed the way they were going to fund nonprofits. So what United Way did, the United Way did that year was they will only fund a nonprofit's management. That was it. If you were looking for monies, they would not fund a specific program, but they would give you money for just to fund the management, either the director, associate director, or whatever staff you had, but they won't actually fund the program itself. So that one change right there cut out a lot of money. Then you had it on a federal level at the same time that year. They changed everything about how they were going to fund nonprofits. So within those two pools drying up really quickly out of nowhere, eventually money ran out fundraising and stuff. It became very hard, and Latino youth folded. But Ms. Lydia Torres was there at the time. She was the executive director. Juan Candelaria, who I owe a lot to because he was the assistant director there at the time. This was before he was even in politics. He was working there, and they took me under their wings, and I was only a volunteer. I would come in there. They would allow me to work with the children and help develop their programs, and I got to, get some experience. But I had prior experience with LEAP, working with children, so I brought that to Latino youth. So shout out to LEAP and what they did to help me get the tools to help my community later on, and that's what I ended up doing. And then with Juan just helped me out. He got me into Jewish Family Services later on as a case manager and continued working. But there is a need in our Latin community right now to provide a resource or at least some kind of development for our youth, and it's just not there. And the other thing that happened in the 90s was unfortunately in our community, we did not prepare leaders to take over. We didn't groom people. There were, there's always this struggle with power. And this generation views power differently. So that generation, maybe they held on to the power a little bit too long and didn't give people opportunities to take positions of leadership and make their mistakes, in our neighborhood where we can keep an eye on things. And that dried up our talent pool. Right now, we're suffering right now with
Jose,
from that low talent pool.
I think we, the Puerto Ricans, have a serious issue that I don't think any other community has. Okay.
Oh yeah, because we were born with papers, so we're not even aware of our privilege.
Yep. But I think the main issue here is that we do not stick together as a community.
Oh no.
We don't help our own. We're so divided that we don't protect our own. We don't protect our own, and that's one of the main reasons we have here in the problem, the racial issues, not only the racial issues, but the fact that we do not have more people in leadership. Mm-hmm. And like you said, we don't groom others because we're too busy grooming ourselves. Mm-hmm.
Well, we suffer from the crabs in the barrel syndrome. And then we're fighting over scraps here at the bottom because we're not at the top of the pyramid. We're at the bottom. So by the time the money trickles down to our community or to people of color, it's very little. So and then we're Americanized. America teaches individuals to be individuals. I mean, you could look at the family structure right now. Even as a family, how often does American families sit down together compared to 30 years ago? 30 years ago, you used to sit down together every night. When's the last time you can get your kids in the same room with you now? We are Americanized, and we're part of the American culture now. So it's hard to establish within even our community some kind of structure because we are just being programmed, constantly bombarded with American way, with independence, with financial independence. I mean, it's changing now because no one can afford to move out anymore. That's the only reason kids are staying until their 30s with their parents. But back in the 90s, and when the economy is good, people are taught to leave their house and become independent immediately. That in earlier years, because of the lack of communication, the lack of, like I was saying, every time you introduce a technology, the children feel like they know more than their parents. So my generation got the internet. So, of course, we feel like we know more than our parents. So we don't want to even listen to them anymore. And we go and find our own community or in our own way in the world because we find the older generation to be antiquated in their philosophy. So it's a combination of the American agenda, capitalism, because capitalism is for individuals for themselves. You can't work in groups in capitalism because that doesn't work. And at the same token, we have this we're just taking away family structures. And so that family structure gets taken apart, community follows immediately right after. So if you can't sit down together at a dinner as a family, how can we come as a community and have dinner together and work on our differences when in our own households we lose that training? We lose that training, that discussion, that family dynamics of discussing politics at Thanksgiving dinner. Because right now, Thanksgiving dinner, I mean, you got to send invites. You got to pay people to even come to dinner now. They're too busy for you.
Okay, so Jose, you mentioned that a personality with acting and comedy credentials. So give us a little bit of your personality with of acting credentials.
Well, I just want to thank, people like Tommy Reyes, Norma, these people in our communities that are personalities. They're out there and they put themselves out there. They take risk with their character. They accept challenges with who they are. These were my examples growing up, to not be afraid, to be fearless, to go out there and get yours, get your piece of the pie. With that allows me, and Gail Stagger is my high school teacher. She was always big on Danny Glover and Sidney Poitier. She was like, oh, these fine men. So when I grow up, I want, she gave me the opportunity.
You want her to say that about you.
Yes, I did.
You want people to say that about you.
But she gave me my first opportunity to go on the stage. And I liked that attention and at that time, but you do things for different reasons. But at that time, she gave me an opportunity to get on stage and start getting my chops. And then over time, you get distracted from it. But then I went back and I worked on it. And I went to Upright Citizens Brigade in New York City, and I learned long form improv. So that those sketches you see on SNL, that's a science. So I went and I learned the science of how to build that kind of comedy. So I took a whole year and to use all my vacation time while I was working at Channel 8. I would take that whole year. I accomplished that, and that was my first introduction to like theater, long form comedy, and how to build on a joke, one-upmanship, things of that nature. Little games, theater games that helped me lay a good foundation to where I want to go. Now, growing up, we saw Chespirito, El Chapulín Colorado. We saw these great programming, and even my name. I used to watch this guy named Jose Cadelario Tres Patines, who was a comedian from, I want to say he was Puerto Rican. No, he was Mexican.
I think he was Mexican, yes.
Mexican comedian, and he had this court show, and he was super funny. So I got to learn that, and then I learned about Henny Youngman, who was a Jewish comedian, and he always had these one-liners about. So I started learning and learning and learning. I got my first on-air thing with Meryl Streep's in Hope Springs. I was in that in like 2 seconds, but at least I got on set. I was in the background. I got to meet Tommy Lee Jones during that experience. Then I worked in television for News 8 for 12 years or something before I went to 6 ABC in Philly. So I worked behind the scenes a lot in the industry. But then on camera, and that led me to go and find a way to work on my craft, right? Because you got to work on your craft. You have to have presentation. You got to be confident in yourself. How do you do that? Nobody wants to hire me, to act because I don't have acting credentials. So I started doing open mics. And open mics was a way for me to get my steam going, get my presence going, go out there and fail and fail miserably. And it's to the point now when I go out and I have a bad set, it's like I enjoy that bad set because I know how to learn from those experiences now, and those things help. And now look at me. I'm a co-host on the #1 radio show on the New Haven Independence with a gorgeous co-host, and I get to, show who I am.
Thank you.
Oh.
So do you have a few shows? Do you have a couple of skits for us?
Oh, no. There's no purpose. See, there's no purpose. See, my strong suit is improv. My strong suit is improv. I mean, I can improvise now. I mean, I just want to keep the flirting between us at a minimum because that's where I go to right away because you're very distracting. I'm trying not to look at the screen right now. So those kind of things are happening, and I was told by Mr. Bass to Mr. Paul Bass was like, keep it clean today. So I was like, okay, now that's another challenge.
Mr. Paul Bass. Nobody calls him Mr. Paul Bass.
Okay. Man, Mr. Paul Bass is like Jewish royalty around this place. You don't understand. He's a demigod,
Yeah,
we'll be writing books
guy.
About him later on, in history. But these are the people that I've seen. I saw Paul come from The Advocate, right?
Yes.
And then he starts this thing. So, these are the examples I see in my community, and they come from all over. And I just followed people. Like Paul was like today, I was like, oh, do you have a Facebook? And I was like, Paul, we've been friends for over 8 years. So he doesn't even know how long I've been following his career and what he's done, because, sometimes you don't need to interact. You just need to follow and learn. And that's what I've been doing. And here I am. Okay.
Well, here you are, and we thank you for being here. And you're going to be co-hosting, and so I think we're going to be seeing each other a lot more frequently. And unfortunately, our time is up, so I want to thank everyone for listening to WNHH 103.5 FM. Here live from New Haven, Connecticut, and streaming Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, the works. Health, money, and love, and plenty of time to enjoy it. Until next time, Norma Rodríguez-Reyes, your co-host, and
Jose Cadelario, your new co-host.
Thank you. And please stay tuned so you can listen to us in Spanish. Gracias.
En breve.
Nos están escuchando a través de WNHH 103.5 FM LP, La Voz Hispana Radio.
Prepárense para obtener su licencia de conducir en Connecticut. Ahora en New Haven, preparamos a personas indocumentadas y documentadas. Las clases son de 8 horas obligatorias por el Departamento de Motores y Vehículos. Y estas clases incluyen drogas y alcohol y técnicas para manejar de manera segura. Estas clases también incluyen un manual para el estudio para pasar el examen escrito y 100 preguntas que posiblemente estén en el examen. ¿Por qué? Porque a nosotros nos interesa que usted pase el examen a la primera vez que lo tome. 51 de Elm Street, Suite 307, tercer piso, New Haven, Connecticut, código postal 06510. El número de teléfono 203-376-0864 o el 203-907-0361. Las clases son miércoles y jueves. Estamos certificados por el Departamento de Motores y Vehículos DMV del estado de Connecticut. Ahora es el tiempo y el momento.
La Voz Hispana de Connecticut, el único periódico que cubre las noticias locales de todas las ciudades del estado. Noticias que tienen que ver con el quehacer político, educativo, económico y social de la comunidad hispana de Connecticut. Los mejores articulistas y reporteros, el mejor contenido editorial. La Voz Hispana, la voz de todos, la voz del pueblo.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Ustedes están escuchando WNHH 103.5 FM, La Voz Hispana Radio. Y esta es Norma Rodríguez, su anfitriona del show K-PASA. Nos están escuchando La Voz Hispana CT en la radio también, a través de Facebook, YouTube y Twitter. Hoy tenemos con nosotros a una persona que ya muy prontito, desde hoy en adelante, en nuestro show que pasa, va a ser nuestro co-anfitrión. Y él se llama José Cadelario.
Epa, mira, gracias a todos que están aquí. No sé de dónde salieron toda esta gente. Gracias a todos.
Bueno, José Cadelario, nacido y criado en New Haven, Connecticut, un producto de todas las personas positivas que marcan la diferencia en nuestra comunidad. Trabajó con Latino Youth Development, que inafortunadamente hoy en día no existe esa agencia. Nosotros estamos pidiéndole a las personas que nos están escuchando que por favor empleen en su comunidad. Y necesitamos un Latino Youth Development, que es una agencia de desarrollo para nuestra juventud. También trabajó para Columbus House. Ese es el lugar donde personas que no tienen hogar, ahí se quedan. The Community Action Agency, la agencia que ayuda a las personas con diferentes programas. The Jewish Family Services también, que ayuda, porque se llama Jewish, no quiere decir que solamente para los judíos,
No.
sino que ayuda definitivamente a todas las personas. Citizens Television es a televisión con acceso al público. También estuvo ahí. Entonces, en el sector privado, José Candelario trabaja para el Canal 8 de aquí en New Haven, Connecticut. Trabajaba para el Canal 8 y también para GABC Philly en Filadelfia. José es una personalidad con credenciales en actuación y comedia. Así que tenemos un poquito de todo aquí. Albergó muchos programas de acceso público y producción de espectáculos para televisión y teatro. Siempre un servidor para la comunidad. Gracias tanto, José, por estar hoy con nosotros.
No, Norma, gracias a usted, porque estoy en la presencia de una reina. Muchísimas gracias. Y un rey, porque ahí está Don King ahí velándome en la esquina. Muchísimas gracias a Don King también.
¿Verdad que sí? Bueno, José, todas estas diferentes agencias que se han mencionado aquí, vamos a hablar de estas agencias y quiénes eran las personas que influenciaron la persona que tú eres hoy día. ¿A quién? Además de tu madre y padre, obviamente, ¿verdad que sí?
Tengo que empezar con este programa a hablar de San Juan Bautista, una iglesia pequeña que tenía la única misa en español. Y allí empecé yo era monanguillo en esos días con Padre Joe. La gente de la comunidad se recuerda de Padre Joe, que fumaba mucho, pero siempre estaba allí por nuestra comunidad hispana.
¿Dónde era St. John the Baptist?
Eso era allí, al lado de Casa Otoñal.
Ok. Father Odell. ¿Tú estás hablando con Father Odell?
Antes era Father Odell y después era Father Joe. Yeah, I think we're talking about the same guy. El primer nombre era Joe.
Ajá.
Y entonces esa fue mi primera experiencia en nuestra comunidad. Y como yo me crié en Bassett Street, en una comunidad afroamericana, pero todos los domingos estamos en esa comunidad hispana, en San Juan Bautista, y lo pasamos allí como monaguillo. Entonces allí conocí gente como Meneno Osorio, y allí empecé con Raúl, el doctor Ávila, y ellos me sacaron de allí y me introducieron a ser un sirviente al público. Y empecé a registrar gente para los votos y todo, en una edad bien joven.
Ahora, Menén y Raúl ellos eran los directores de uno de los programas más importantes aquí en New Haven.
También Flechas.
Antes de Flechas.
Antes de Flechas.
¿Cómo se llamaba?
¿Qué era?
Antes de Flecha, era que estaban encargados de el festival de Loíza Aldea.
Ajá, pues.
Eso mismito, Loíza Aldea.
Loíza Aldea, pero ahora se llama...
la organización.
La organización se cambió a Flecha y siguieron con el propósito de tener el festival de Loíza aquí en New Haven, porque ellos introducieron afrocaribeño, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Vamos a decir, el afrocaribeño aquí en New Haven. Y trajeron esa cultura. Y hicieron un trabajo tremendo por muchos años. Y sigue y todavía sigue, porque hay un señor que se llama Bart Edgar Martínez, que sigue con la cultura afrocaribeña, y cada vez que estamos tratando de traer para atrás esa negrura de nuestro país aquí en New Haven.
Sí, lo interesante es que tú sabes, aprendimos mucho, hubieron muchos de los hispanos, porque recuérdense que en estos momentos estamos hablando de la cultura puertorriqueña, porque todavía la ola de inmigración no había llegado a New Haven, Connecticut. No. Era solamente la ola puertorriqueña, ¿verdad? Y lo interesante era que siempre tenían programas para los afro-puertorriqueños, pero no tenían programas para los que no eran de tez negra.
Y eso, por eso, cuando nosotros vinimos aquí, yo no sé, mi experiencia, yo soy primer generación americanizado. Yo no sé nada de inmigración, porque claro que somos cirujanos.
¿Tú naciste aquí?
Yo nací aquí.
En New Haven.
En New Haven, allí en New Haven, al lado de George Bush, que también...
Presidente Bush,
el
¿verdad?
presidente Bush también se nació aquí también, el
Sí.
segundo. Pero yo no sé el trabajo que tenía que hacer mi padre para venir aquí. Ellos sí tenían muchas dificultades. Mi padre específicamente también a aprender un lenguaje diferente. Como quiera, era cirujanos, they were citizens, right?
Ciudadanos.
Tenía papeles, ya tenía papeles, pero la cultura era diferente. Y para aprender una cultura, ellos, para mí, como era tan difícil para ellos, para mí, seguidita cuando yo nací, ellos no querían que yo hablaba español. Querían que solamente aprendía inglés para no tener acento. Para entonces yo echar para adelante en la América, porque ellos ya vieron, ya se dieron de cuenta que si aguantara mucho la cultura hispana, no va a echar para adelante con la cultura americana, porque son dos diferentes cosas.
Sí, porque en ese tiempo, ¿ok? Ellos solamente querían que tú hablaras inglés solamente,
Ujú.
¿ok? Y que lo hablara sin ningún acento. Y lo que estaba pasando era que muchos de los de la tez blanca querían no hablar sin ningún tipo de acento para que así se creyeran y pudieran asimilar y se creyeran que eran americanos. Pero la verdad es que no importaba, tú no eras americano, aunque no importa qué blanco tú eras.
No,
¿verdad?
mi esposa que es una blanquita con ojos azules, tú la conoces, ella fue a una escuela en Dayton, Ohio, ella fue allá y ellos seguidita dijeron, pero tú no eres blanca. Apariencia nada más, ya sabía que ella no era blanca, porque ella no tenía la figura ni la cara de un blanco. La piel no importa, para cierta gente. Ellos ya saben que usted no es parte y te dejan saber, pero la verdad es que somos americanos. Ya que yo estoy aquí, nacido y criado, yo no puedo ir a Puerto Rico ahora a vivir en la isla y coger un mango de un palo. Yo no sé coger un mango de un palo. Yo tengo que ir a la tienda y comprarlo y pagar los 3 pesos.
O 5, hoy en día son 5
son más caros. Era 50 centavos cuando era joven, pero ha cambiado la inflation.
Tú sabes, la gente aquí, especialmente los nuevos inmigrantes que han llegado, ellos no pueden relacionarse con lo que nosotros sufrimos, ¿ok? Para poder asimilar y lo interesante es que nos critican porque no hablamos bien el español. ¿Okay?
Oh, sí,
hablamos el Spanglish, pero ellos necesitan saber que sus hijos en
una generación ya se va a olvidar de español, no se preocupe.
Lo mismito que nos está pasando a nosotros.
O
¿okay?
la segunda, porque a veces es diferente. Es cierto, porque naturalmente puertorriqueños ya como somos parte de las Américas más que cualquier otro país, hablamos más inglés, tenemos palabras que son más inglés. Como nosotros decimos al techo el rufo, le decimos el patio la yarda, yard. Nosotros decimos yarda. Por eso dice que nuestro español es americanizado, pero es que solamente la colonia de nosotros, estamos colonizados por la América más que otros países. Los otros países solamente estamos colonizados por los españoles. Es diferente, pero nuestro español se cambia, porque te digo que los colombianos hablan español diferente a los peruanos, no sé, los de Guatemala hablan otro español, con un acento diferente, va a Cusco, yo no entiendo a nadie en Cusco, si voy para Cusco tenía que aprender otro español. Como quiera, nuestro idioma cambia, depende de nuestra la región que está. Sí.
La verdad es también, tú sabes, es como aquí en América, tú sabes que en Inglaterra, ellos hablan con un acento, ¿verdad? pero hablan inglés. Es lo mismito aquí, la gente de Bronx, la gente de Brooklyn, de Nueva York, hablan con sus acentos, pero todavía la básica es el inglés. Así mismito, por eso es que nos entendemos,
Sí.
que aunque tenemos diferentes palabras que utilizamos, pero la base es español, ¿verdad que sí?
Menos los españoles, porque estos vienen con esta Z, ¿no? Que todo el mundo tiene un acento así, no habla así bien. Hasta Don King a veces cree que es europeo, me sale dominicano así.
Bueno, cuéntanos, Candelaria, Cadelario.
No me confundo con el señor, el gran representante Juan Candelaria, que le debo dar muchas gracias porque cuando uno de los primeros sitios que yo era voluntario era el Latino Youth con la señorita Lidia Torres y Juan Candelaria. Me dieron ellos una oportunidad que usar lo que mi conocimiento, trabajar con la juventud, me trajeron, me dejaron ser voluntario y poner algo en mi resumen, porque en ese tiempo no tenía nada en mi resumen. Me dieron una oportunidad y ya tengo un resumen que trabajo con niños y tengo que darle las gracias porque también Juan fue que me dio el primer trabajo con Jewish Family Services, que tenía una oportunidad de trabajar con individuales que estaban en el sistema y estaba buscando una manera de salir del sistema, especialmente la gente pobre.
Cuando tú hablas del sistema, ¿qué quiere decir sistema?
Recursos, like DSS.
Departamento de Servicios Sociales.
Porque antes era Departamento de Servicios Sociales, antes de George Bush, que gente le daba dinero. Yo le ayudaba a la gente, especialmente madres con niños, a buscar trabajo, cuidar de niños, buscar manera de pagar su calefactura, pagar la renta. Yo he trabajado con muchos de esa familia en New Haven y por Derby, hasta Hartford, New London. Y esa experiencia fue tremendo.
Bueno, en términos de Latino Youth, ¿ok?
Vamos a
Porque
ver.
tú te recuerdas
Sí.
de Candelaria y Doña Lidia, pero yo me recuerdo desde antes Candelaria y Lidia, en la cual una de las personas que fue muy influencial en empezar esa agencia fue Pura Vélez, que se encuentra hoy día en Florida. Okay.
En la Florida.
En la Florida, that's right. Y el primer director fue Freddy Perez y Tomás Reyes también fue director de Latino Youth Development. Y esa es una agencia que nosotros necesitamos que regrese nuevamente, porque necesitamos servicio para nuestros jóvenes. Aquí no hay nada, you know.
Y no solamente servicio, la gente no entiende que necesitamos un edificio que la gente se puede sentir seguro. Que puede compartir saludablemente. Eso es lo que necesitamos, no solamente los recursos para los resúmenes, vamos a suponer, para ayudar a la juventud a hacer un resumen. No sé si lo usan ahora porque Internet cambió todo, pero para tener eso, ¿cómo se llama? Skills.
Destrezas
para echar para adelante en nuestra comunidad, porque esos son destrezas que uno no te enseñan en la escuela, pero uno aprende por estar con otra gente que ya son más maduros y ya saben.
Okay. Bueno, vamos a hablar de Johnny Martínez. Hoy en día encontramos que hay una escuela en el nombre del representante estatal John Martínez Jr., ¿ok?
Señor Juan
Cuéntanos
Martínez.
del papel que él jugó en tu vida.
A través de Tomás Reyes y Norma Rodríguez me conocí un señor, Juan Martínez, que yo era vecino de su padre, la iglesia, la Puerta de Salvación allí en Columbus Avenue. Yo era vecino y yo me crié al lado de esa iglesia. Y yo en mi juventud sabía quién era Juan Martínez, el pastor. Y después me introducieron a Juan Martínez Jr. Y fue una persona tremenda conmigo. Él fue la primera persona que me llevó a edificio, a Marlboro, en Nueva York. En Marlboro, que vende cigarrillos. Tengo un edificio ahí de casi 200 pisos. Y ahí sentado, y él como nada. La primera vez que yo veo un hispano mandando a los blancos y diciéndole a ellos que necesito tu dinero para nuestra comunidad. Y ellos seguidita, toma, ahí lo tiene. Y a ver eso, en persona me dio tanto alegre y también un foco en mi vida que yo puedo hacer lo mismo para mi comunidad. Y yo nunca puedo dar las gracias a Juan por eso, porque me dio tanta alegre y tanta energía y un propósito en mi vida. Y con eso, por eso estoy aquí ahora, pero él era tremendo persona, era una persona de calidad y es con todo el mundo, porque tú dices que yo me llevo bien con todo el mundo y ese es por él, porque yo veo como ese es bregado con los morenos. Y le lava la mano y chaleaba y de momento da la vuelta y allí con los blanquitos también, seguidita, derechito, y ahí, ¿cómo está, señor? Y va. Y cuando con ese ejemplo, yo eché para adelante mi vida.
Tú sabes que es para mí una lástima que él se fue tan temprano, porque nosotros necesitamos esas personas que nos ayuden, que sean role models, que los jóvenes necesitan que nosotros le ayudemos a ellos para que en la vida se les sea mucho más fácil para ellos. So,
Es difícil. La cosa con nuestra comunidad, hay poco dinero. Hay tan poco dinero que siempre estamos peleando por los 10 centavos que el hombre da a nosotros. So, no dejamos también, peleando por el dinero, no tenemos una máquina para ser líderes en nuestra comunidad. Una máquina que puede enseñar a la gente cómo ser directores de agencias, que sea directores o que sea directores de su propia agencia o crear una agencia. ¿Cómo se hace un 501c3? ¿Cómo se va a buscar los recursos para hacer un board? Eso es conocimiento así es que hace falta ahora y es bien difícil que cuando las generaciones no cambian. La tecnología cambia seguida, pero como nosotros vemos nuestra comunidad, eso no cambia. Y eso tiene que cambiar, tiene que empezar desde ahora. Tenemos que empezar. Ya a los 5 años tú debes estar treñando a ese joven cómo ser presidente de Estados Unidos, como hacen las otras comunidades. Las otras culturas, ellos votan a los hijos, hasta los 5 años ya los mandan a escuela de Europa seguida. They send them away for school. Nosotros no. No tenemos los recursos para mandar a nuestros hijos, pero...
No, pero tampoco queremos mandar a nuestros hijos a esa edad para ningún sitio. Nosotros queremos tener nuestros hijos con nosotros entre más tiempo.
Mira, la
todavía.
otra cultura, la otra gente, ellos mandan a sus hijos a boarding school seguidita.
Sí.
Ahora mismo son los que están en el Middle East, la gente del Middle East que tienen dinero, que el dinero por el aceite, ahora es la gente árabe, ahora vienen y ellos están mandando a sus hijos a estudiar aquí. Los líderes de ellos vienen a estudiar aquí a Yale y después vuelven a su país a coger su país. Nosotros tenemos que hacer lo mismo. Y los países hispanos hacen eso también, porque muchos de los presidentes de Latinoamérica, muchos de los representantes políticos de Latinoamérica, muchos de ellos salieron de Yale, Harvard, Princeton. Ellos ya saben, la gente con dinero ya sabe cómo crear la próxima generación. Nosotros, los pobres, tenemos que hacer lo mismo para nuestra gente, aunque se va a necesitar una comunidad para mandar uno a Yale, porque a Yale un año son casi 60,000 pesos ahora, casi. Es bien caro.
No, yo creo que es mucho más de eso.
Mucho. Mira, imagínate. Necesita una comunidad entera para mandar un chamaquito a Yale.
Yeah. Bueno, tú estabas hablando de la importancia de enseñarle a las personas a crear un 501 C3, que en realidad eso quiere decir una agencia sin fines de lucro. También la importancia de enseñar a nuestros niños escoger miembros de las juntas, de la organización que tú has creado, porque obviamente esas son las personas que traen el dinero para la agencia. Es importante, tú sabes, que gente pobre que no tenga nada, no se pueden en realidad poner en juntas, tiene que ser gente con influencia, que tengan personas que tienen plata o
con buena idea, buena idea para usar los recursos que hay, porque somos antillanos. Y los antillanos todos tenemos la misma problema. Tenemos la colonia, la número 1, Y número 2, no tenemos recursos. So, cuando tú te crías cuando estás criado en Puerto Rico, tú usas los materiales alrededor del vecindario para hacer una casita para usted. Y así se aprende, pero eso que aprendieron ya se ha perdido con el tiempo. Ya esa mentalidad ya no existe.
Bueno, Candelario.
Dime, señorita o doña, no sé qué prefiere. Yo prefiero señorita.
Cualquier cosa.
Ok, señorita
está bien
Rodríguez.
conmigo.
Estamos.
Pero le queremos dar gracias, y inafortunadamente el tiempo se nos fue tan rápido.
Y hay más que hablar, hay mucho más.
Seguro, queremos recordar a nuestra audiencia que desde hoy en adelante José Candelario va a ser nuestro co-anfitrión y van a estar escuchándolo aún más todavía y disfrutando de toda la experiencia que él tiene a través del tiempo con todas las diferentes agencias y todas las diferentes buenas los sitios donde él ha viajado y además los chistes también. ¿Verdad que sí?
Sí, bien chistoso, pero limpio, porque como estamos aquí en La Voz, es como yendo a la iglesia, no se puede decir malas palabras.
Bueno, nuevamente.
Y muchísimas gracias a La Voz Hispana, a todo el mundo que están aquí por tenerme y para traerme para atrás, ¿no? Tiene mucha confianza al señor Don King, que está aquí velándome en la esquinita, asegurándome que estoy diciendo lo más mejor posible, me estoy portando bien. Ojalá me da los 5 pesos después.
¿Verdad? Por haberte comportado bien.
Sí.
Bueno, mi gente, hasta la próxima. Se despide de ustedes Norma Rodríguez-Reyes en el show que pasa a través de WNHH 103.5. Le quiero recordar salud, dinero, amor, tiempo para disfrutarlo y que vivamos 120 años en buena salud. Hasta la próxima.
Adelante.
WNHH